The zombie is absolutely the all-American horror metaphor.
They are the monster of the 21st century. Right now, it does seem like we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse.
We're getting a chance to exercise our most antisocial emotions. You know, that mob impulse. It's like, yeah, kill them all and let God sort them out.
Eventually, they overwhelm you. They're not stopping to eat. Well, I mean, unless they're stopping to eat one of you.
We're all gonna die. We all are gonna get cancer one day. We're all gonna get sick. It's almost like an accelerated version of that.
We don't want zombies to come and destroy all of our friends and family and institutions. But on some level, maybe we do. Like, on some level, it provides us a chance to just dismantle everything and possibly start over.
What are humans like when faced with the end of humanity? What are they like when they're faced with very few choices in regards to how to survive? That's the horror of zombie movies. It's the wrong impulses that come out of people that are far more terrifying than The Walking Dead.
I'm Eli Roth. The history of horror is filled with monsters, nightmare figures that tap into our deepest fears. But our fears and our monsters change with the times. Right now, it's the time of the zombie. Fast zombies, slow zombies, comedy zombies, teen zombies. Whatever their shape, zombies are everywhere. How did we get here? What set off zombie fever? Zombies have been around for decades. But the debut of The Walking Dead in 2010 saw them explode into popular culture. To almost everyone's surprise, a horror series became the most popular show on television.
My brother's kids, 10 years old, 5 years, they watch Walking Dead. Kids 8 years old watch Walking Dead. What is it about Walking Dead that zombies have become so almost normalized that kids love it, they don't take it seriously? I think it's amazing. Walking Dead plays like a family show.
It's all about the characters. You can follow this group of people as they struggle to survive week after week after week after week. You can see them live, you can see them die, you can see everything that they go through with the zombie apocalypse set as the backdrop.
Everybody wants to think that they would be able to survive the zombie apocalypse. And figure, what would I do to survive? Because that is the crux of the show. Ordinary people who all of a sudden are thrust into an extraordinary situation, which always gives you some of the best drama.
Are you gonna fight for what you believe in? Are you gonna be the type of person that runs away from it? You know, there's no status and fame and money, and there's none of that bull.
The apocalyptic simulation is really an interesting sociological experiment about, you know, who do people become and who would I become and what would be okay if the rules weren't the same anymore. I want to be a Michonne, but I'm probably more of, I don't know, Eugene.
You got a name, ass?
Eugene.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're acting like a child.
They're coming for you. Look, there comes one of them now.
Without George Romero and Night of the Living Dead, there would be no Walking Dead. Night of the Living Dead laid the template for every zombie survival story that followed. It's a simple plot. 6 people trapped in a farmhouse, surrounded by the flesh-eating undead. But it changed everything.
I mean, you got to see the boundary push going from the 1950s creatures, the man in the rubber suit, to like graphic viscera. What was it like seeing it pushed farther and farther?
I can remember just sort of wandering into a screening of Night of the Living Dead. The whole place was full of kids. It was like a Saturday matinee. And they're all, you know, yelling and grab-assing around and throwing their popcorn boxes. And that thing got going. And they just fell entirely silent. And I was scared, too. The first time that you see something like that, you're not prepared for what you're looking at.
George Romero really creates the rules. I mean, the whole thing of, like, if you get bit, you turned into one.
Yeah.
Shoot him in the head. That didn't exist before.
Those rules for the modern-day zombie were created 50 years ago.
By George Romero.
If I were surrounded by 6 or 8 of these things, would I stand a chance with them?
Well, there's no problem. If you had a gun, shoot him in the head. That's a sure way to kill him. If you don't, get yourself a club or a torch. Beat him or burn him. They go up pretty easy.
It almost feels like the zombie movie, there's like a quantum leap that happens where there are different phases. Like the 1930s and 40s, it was the I walked with a zombie. It was white zombie. It was the hypnotist zombie. It was a mad scientist on an island that has found a way to raise the dead and enslave them.
A lot of zombie films were about people who had been just stripped of their identity and were slaves almost. You know, they could be workers or they could just sort of shamble and look scary, but they weren't attacking and biting and killing like they did in Night of the Living Dead.
I mean, there were things that were so transgressive in that movie. The little girl stabs her mother to death.
The little kid killing her mom? No one had ever seen anything like that.
The first time you see it, you're just horrified. You can't believe what you're seeing.
Night of the Living Dead was much more of a claustrophobic nightmare kind of an experience. Night of the Living Dead is also somewhat facetious, and it has its socio-political allegory.
What's important about Night of the Living Dead is the fact that the travails of the people locked in that house are really a microcosm of what's going on in American society. The tumult of the late 1960s is reflected in the fear and the violence that occur in and around that house.
That movie's revolutionary in many, many ways and had profound impact. The fact it had a black lead, which George always said was not deliberate. It was that Dwayne was the best actor. I don't believe him. I think it was deliberate.
With all of us working, we can fix this place up in no time. We have everything we need up here.
We can take all that stuff downstairs with us. Man, you're really crazy, you know that?
Let's say you're a white viewer in the late 1960s who has a few prejudices, say, and is a little bit worried that the world is ending because of all of the racial legislation of the 60s, the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. And here's this zombie film where the dead are coming back to life and a black man is in charge.
I don't want anyone's life on my hands.
Is there anything I can do?
I don't want to hear any more from you, mister. If you stay up here, you take orders from me.
I will contend that that might have been as frightening to some viewers as the child eating her mother in the basement.
What we get is potentially something hopeful, you know, with the African-American protagonist, like maybe some new direction socially, but instead it just turns into vigilante justice represented by a white lynch mob.
You can imagine the shock that audiences must have felt to be coaxed into identifying with a black man, only to have him shot and then pitchforked onto a pile of burning bodies at the end. That's a slap. That's a direct slap to any audience, right wing or left wing.
Night of the Living Dead does not end on any kind of triumph. Your hero is shot by police. It's the most upsetting ending in cinema. And then that has continued through horror cinema, that actually it doesn't always have a happy ending. I think that's the joy of horror cinema, is that it can affect you in lots of different ways.
If George Romero had only made Night of the Living Dead, he would still be a legend. But he didn't stop. Night of the Living Dead and its sequels changed the course of film history and inspired the best the horror genre has to offer.
He was such a big influence on Shaun of the Dead. We like this idea of our film taking place within George Romero's universe.
Shaun of the Dead was so well done that it opened the floodgates to like everybody to try and make a zombie thing.
Today, zombie movies and TV shows are everywhere, but not so long ago they had virtually disappeared. Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead helped bring them back, bigger than ever.
When we thought of Shaun of the Dead, one of the inspirations for it is because there hadn't been a zombie film for like 15 years. We always had this theory that, like, John Landis's video for Thriller had sort of killed off zombies for the second half of the 80s and early 90s.
So I think what happened was, all of a sudden, the zombie genre, which traditionally had probably sort of died out a little bit, and then all of a sudden you have all these zombie video games, and you're like, man, people love shooting zombies.
It was around, like, the late 90s when Resident Evil came out, the game. So people started to take an interest in the genre again.
Every now and then we see a movie that is supposedly horror, but yet uses social commentary brilliantly. And the best example is Shaun of the Dead. If you want to know where Britain was at that time, you look at Shaun of the Dead. In the 90s and the dawn of the new century, we were in a new phase in Britain. And a whole new generation of Britons were asking, what's next? And they were a little lost.
Hang on, listen. All top left. Uh-huh. I was gonna say, reload? I'm on it.
And it was brilliant.
What I love about Shaun of the Dead is they're not making fun of zombie movies. They're making a funny zombie movie.
I'm not gonna say if you love her, let her go. And I'm not gonna bombard you with cliches. But what I will say is this. It's not the end of the world.
And they play on all the tropes.
Sorry, we're closed.
I'd been playing Resident Evil 3 like all night. My girlfriend at the time had gone away. And I promised her I wouldn't play video games all weekend, and I did exactly that. And I remember vividly playing it until the sun came up. And then walking across the street to the newsagent to get some milk, to make some tea. And I walked across the street, and it was completely empty on a Sunday morning, and the shop was the only thing that was open. And in that moment, I had a thought of thinking, what would it be like if zombies were here right now? And what would I do? Because we don't really have guns in the UK. How would I defend myself? It's just that little thought really sort of started to inspire the sequence where Shaun walks to the store and back, hungover.
So the zombie apocalypse has started, but he's still unaware of it.
And he does this walk. It's a long, steady cam shot. He goes into the shop, and he doesn't notice little things. The bloody handprints on the wall.
And he's walking away from the refrigerator, and he just slips in blood. It's so subtle, but it's such a great moment because you know you as the audience know what's coming. His character doesn't know it yet, and he's still out of it.
Nelson.
It's such a simple moment, but it's one of my favorite moments in the movie.
It's wonderful the way they show the collapse of society. Zombies become the symbol of anarchy and the collapse of the system and all the protections.
Top left. Reload. I'm on it.
We wanted to stay true to the spirit of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. The film is like a Valentine to George Romero because we love those movies. We're like showing our deep, deep love for the subject.
Right down to its title, Shaun of the Dead is a tribute to what any horror fan will tell you is the greatest zombie film of all time.
There's no greater zombie movie than Dawn of the Dead.
I think Dawn of the Dead is a real masterpiece.
It's that rare kind of like nightmare world which you actually wouldn't, I mean, maybe this is just me, but you wouldn't mind being in it.
George Romero's Night of the Living Dead created the modern zombie. That was a hard act to follow, but the director topped it with his sequel, Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead was a potent mixture of horror, satire, and outrageous special effects.
It's basically a continuation of Night of the Living Dead, where zombies are taking over the world.
This was the first depiction of a full-scale zombie apocalypse. A nightmare vision of social collapse that became the template for virtually every end-of-the-world story we see today. Once again, Romero used horror to comment on American values.
He is masterfully executing all of those horror elements in a way that brings it right to a social justice scenario.
Martinez! You've been watching. You know we've got this building surrounded.
Particularly that opening when in the ghettos, all of the poor are keeping their loved ones hidden away from the rest of the world because they know that they will kill them.
People on this project are your responsibility.
In the first 20 minutes, there's a SWAT team raiding a house. And one of the police officers is unbelievably racist.
Yeah, come on, Martinez, show your greasy little Puerto Rican ass so I can blow it right off.
And I was like, why is this guy concerned with racism? Like, there's zombies in the building. It was unbelievable. I was like, aren't there bigger problems?
Let's go, let's go!
That blew my mind as a kid because I realized I was watching a political story about the race and class system in America.
After showing society crumbling, the film shifts focus to a small group of survivors who take refuge in a suburban shopping mall.
I think the great thing about zombies is they are like a catch-all metaphor of the world's ills. And I think George Romero doesn't really get enough credit as a satirist as well as a horror filmmaker. Dawn of the Dead being the most kind of savage statement about the state of consumerism in the late 70s. And the idea that the mindless hordes flock to the big fancy shopping mall. It was very pointed and very funny.
What are they doing? Why did they come here?
Some kind of instinct, a memory of what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
You can't watch that movie and not become aware of the fact that this is a story about what humans really are, grasping vampiric creatures that kind of return endlessly to their old habits because that's what they've been taught.
I think Dawn of the Dead should be sold in a box set with Easy Rider. It should be called The Baby Boomers, the beginning and the end. Romero has managed to distill the worst of every generation into all of his movies. You see the baby boomers losing their souls.
What have we done to ourselves?
Because what Romero did was channel his outrage at his generation's ultimate surrender of all their ideals. And he put it in a movie.
So, I mean, if you were going to go out and do a talky little drama to try to criticize the consumer society that we have here, you couldn't make $30 million. You know,
that's for sure.
So terrific. You get a couple of jabs in while you're having fun with the roller coaster ride, which really is the surface.
Romero was a man with a message, but his gleeful embrace of gore made him a horror favorite.
Dawn of the Dead, I'd never seen that level of a body count in a movie.
You're like watching, like, who made this? Like a maniac?
Like, normally one movie, there'd be one kill that was amazing. And it was like every 30 seconds, each kill was different. That helicopter blade, pulling it off the head
with a giant forehead.
Which when you're a kid, by the way, when you're a kid, you never see that coming. You see he staggers out and his head. You never put two and two together. Now you look at it and go, oh, of course he's gonna get his head cut off.
Really accomplished horror directors knew having a Tom Savini doing the special makeup effects that it was going to elevate their film and give them a wider audience than they ever anticipated.
Well, it was Halloween every day. We did that for 3 months in a shopping mall. 80% of the effects in that were stuff that we came up with. We'd go to George and say, hey, how about if we drive a screwdriver through a zombie's ear? You go, okay. So then 2 hours later, we're making retractable screwdrivers and, making it bleed inside a zombie's ear.
But the scene that makes you, wonder, oh, wow, can I even handle this, is when the zombie in the project, when his wife, who's still alive, comes to her and embraces him, my baby, and then he just bites just a chunk out of her shoulder. It just looks real. It just, you buy it. If humans had shark-like mouths, that's probably the effect of what would happen if a sharky human bit you. It's just an effect we had never seen before, and it draws a line in the sand. Oh, am I ready for the rest of this?
George Romero's vision was so influential that for decades, most screen zombies were slow-moving ghouls. But in 2002, Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later gave us a zombie for the fast-moving 21st century and set off a controversy that rages to this day.
I'm a slow zombie guy.
I like fast zombies.
I'm a car-carrying slow zombie fan.
Imagine waking up in a world ravaged by a disease that turns ordinary people into mindless predators driven to kill. This is the premise of 28 Days Later, director Danny Boyle's groundbreaking reinvention of the zombie film.
Fight! Fight! 28 Days Later is a perfect horror movie because it's based on a premise you can completely believe. I don't know what it's like to be bitten by a vampire. I don't know what it's like to be threatened by a werewolf. But I can imagine what it's like to have a plague spread like wildfire because it's just too close to the headlines of today's news. It could happen.
28 Days Later came out a year after 9/11, and it includes these really haunting scenes of a deserted London, missing persons flyers pasted to bulletin boards like we saw post 9/11. It also was able to capitalize on a lot of the anxieties and fears of the time. SARS and anthrax and mad cow's disease, bird flus.
Water.
Also, Danny Boyle was commenting on the rage that he saw in society, road rage, people fighting online in the supermarkets. He envisioned a zombie story that took advantage of this psychological virus that could be unleashed and have like a zombie effect on people.
There was one big difference between George Romero's zombies and the infected in 28 Days Later. These zombies were fast.
People talked about sort of the next quantum leap in zombie movies as 28 Days Later, because it had running zombies, even though there were running infected in Umberto Lenzi's Nightmare City from 1980.
I'm a slow zombie guy. Not that I don't like a good, fast zombie movie. I love 28 Days Later. Yes, I know. They're not technically dead. They are rage virus. I get that.
If I can make a criticism of Running Zombies, it's this. It's that Running Zombies generally, there's kind of like a fitness level. That if you look at the zombies in 28 Days Later, they're nearly always like sort of fit, you know, like they're in like a sneakers commercial. When you increase the speed, the people that lose out are the old zombies and the overweight zombies and the little kid zombies. And I would rather have a more inclusive range of zombies.
Zombies that are slow are infinitely more terrifying. It's the difference between getting shot and getting cancer. You get killed by, say, a fast zombie in the World War Z movie or 28 Days Later, you're dead before you know it. Happens too fast. But the slow zombie, the zombie that gives you time to think, allows you to visualize your own death. And that is one of the darker elements of the human mind.
Fast or slow, zombies are usually created by accidental radiation leaks or rogue viruses. But there is another kind of zombie, the deliberately reanimated corpse, like Frankenstein's monster. Created by Mary Shelley in 1818, Frankenstein's monster is the most famous member of The Walking Dead.
Frankenstein's monster is a zombie, for sure. In the novel, he's just a zombie that can talk way too much.
As a kid, I really felt connected to Frankenstein's monster, not so much to Frankenstein himself. I think that goes for a lot of those original horror classics. Those characters are sort of stand-ins for people that are on the fringes of society or castaways, cast-outs.
Boris Karloff's Frankenstein is still the definitive version of the monster. Its direct descendant is H.P. Lovecraft's Reanimator. With Reanimator, director Stuart Gordon reimagined the zombie film as a wildly transgressive horror comedy.
I remember I went to a bunch of kids were hanging out at a house, like having a party, and they watched Breakfast Club, and I'd never been so bored in a movie. I was just like waiting for something to happen.
Someone to get decapitated.
Something, and I was like, I have a much better movie, and I put on Reanimator, and the whole party cleared out.
Well, the film is about medical students who find a way to bring the dead back to life. Particularly, there's this one genius, Herbert West. He's developed a serum which, when it's injected into a dead body, revives it. But the dead are never very grateful.
What was great about Stuart Gordon's take on it, he put a really interesting sense of humor in the whole thing. Because you can look at Reanimator as a comedy.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
Reanimator was like nothing I'd seen before, like nothing anyone had seen before. And the audacity of it is what makes it so powerful.
Boy, that's a sick picture. Really transgressive. Get a lot of crawling hands and heads rolling around like bowling balls.
You should not be censoring yourself. You know, they'll be doing everything they can to censor you. You should not give them an inch.
Reanimator's fun. I don't know what it's about, like that. I don't know that it's about any big ideas whatsoever, except that it would be fun to keep heads alive in a basket.
It's about conquering death. That's really what it's about. My father passed away when I was 14 years old, and I think that that was the hook for me. People always say, if you could bring anybody back to life, who would it be? And in my case, it's a no-brainer. It would be my father. When you look at most horror movies, I think they're about an impossible dream.
In 1985, Reanimator and Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead explored the comic frontiers of the zombie genre. That same year, the king of the zombies, George Romero, was crafting a much darker film, what he hoped would be the zombie film to end all zombie films, Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead was intended to be George Romero's $10 million opus.
George Romero's first 2 zombie films invented a new kind of monster and a new metaphor for life in America.
1, 2, 3, go!
By 1985, he was making what he hoped would be his ultimate statement, a zombie film that combined incredibly realistic special effects with a powerful message.
The message of the Reagan era was no more war on poverty, no more war on crime, no more war on racial segregation. Screw it. We've lost. There's more of them than there are of us, so you need to retreat into your protective enclaves and husband your resources. And that's exactly what our characters do.
You must listen. Listen to this.
In Day of the Dead, we see the military rule, and that's even scarier.
I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein, and I want to know what the you're doing with my time.
A bunch of people who are trying to do good and find a cure are being ruled by this military presence that is very aggressive and will do anything it takes to preserve itself. So that's terrifying as well.
The zombies are in some ways, the ones who are being experimented upon, kind of more sympathetic than many of the humans.
In Dawn of the Dead, we're losing. In Day of the Dead, we've lost.
Most good directors that really have a grasp of the medium can do horror. It's not as delicate as humor. It's not as delicate. There are some tricks of the trade that you can apply.
Like his other zombie films, Day of the Dead was shot in Romero's hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, far outside of the Hollywood system.
That's what made George Romero such a terrific filmmaker, was that he was a legit regional filmmaker. And what made it special was the slightly homemade quality to the movies.
Everywhere that you would go in Pittsburgh, you knew somebody that was a zombie, you knew somebody that was involved with George Romero's movies, and that's how I got into the business, because when Day of the Dead came along, I had befriended George because of some mutual family friends, and he's like, hey, I'm doing a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, do you want a job? I'm like, I was gonna be a doctor, but this sounds way better.
And this is where George Romero and Tom Savini, arguably their creative peaks at the same time working together.
Special effects artists like Rick Baker and Tom Savini were heralded as like kings and icons of the horror film because they were creating special effects that were out of this world, like something we never seen before.
Vietnam was a lesson in anatomy for me. I was a combat photographer. I saw horrible stuff. In fact, I'm the only makeup artist, I think, that has seen the real stuff. In a movie, when someone dies, they close their mouth and they want to look pretty for the camera. And that just takes me right out of it, because that actor doesn't know how to portray death, or the director doesn't know to tell them the mouth always goes slack. My masterpiece is Day of the Dead. There's a lot of cool stuff in Day of the Dead. We cut the guy's arm off, I dug a hole under the guy, so his real arm goes into the hole. And tearing Tasso's head off. And it's actually Greg Nicotero's fingers in the eyeballs of the fake head, and we're running cables down to make the head work, so it was effects guys that were the featured zombies tearing the head off.
My head comes back as a zombie head in Day of the Dead. You got to think about the way that Tom designed things, because he approached everything like it was a magic trick. The idea that you're taking a special effect and you're deconstructing it to the point where it's got to be a magic trick that's going to fool the audience.
The disembowelments in Day of the Dead are unmatched.
Without a doubt, and that's why you get into people who watch movies and get offended by the gore, and you're like, well, it's corn syrup and red powdered food coloring.
The special makeup effects pioneered by Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero on Day of the Dead led directly to the amazing work we see today on The Walking Dead.
The kind of household I grew up in was, oh, you can't go see Day of the Dead. That's too much. But now you see the level of gore that you saw in George Romero's Day of the Dead on Walking Dead every week, which is insane to me.
In the wake of a zombie apocalypse, a small band of survivors look for a safe place to live. The biggest threats they face aren't zombies, but other people. This is the premise of The Walking Dead, the TV series that brought realistic horror to the small screen.
People used to come to me and say, "Can you make us a violent TV series?" And I'd say, well, what makes horror work is you have the threat of killing your characters, and what TV makes TV work is you want to see those characters every week, so you can't have them almost die. And I could never do the violence I wanted to do. Cut to
Here we are.
Greg Nicotero and The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead, for sure, is the next cultural milestone, really, since Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead. And, you know, that's really been you.
Walking Dead is basically a Western with the zombie apocalypse set as the backdrop. If The Walking Dead had to be told in a 2.5-hour time slot, you'd never be able to do it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't care about the characters. You wouldn't really know who Daryl is, who Rick is.
I'm sorry this happened to you.
The plight of the survivors is a dark reflection of life in America today. The mortgage crisis of 2008 resulted in more than 3 million people losing their homes.
Problems with the housing market.
Since then, rising housing prices in the major cities have forced more people to live on the street.
Global meltdown.
There's a sense that civilization is fragile, that any day now, we could be like Rick, Daryl, and Carol, always moving, surrounded by threats on every side.
That's what I always loved when Walking Dead came out. I would say to people, like, if the zombie apocalypse were real, this is the closest thing that I've seen to what that would probably feel like and be like.
When I first read that script, I didn't read it as a zombie thing. I read it as this guy lost his family and he woke up and he didn't know where he was and he was gonna do anything to go find his family. And that stuck out on the page way more than a zombie here and there, you know? And everybody played it like that. You have to play everything as real as possible. There's so many examples on that show where you're like, oh my God, is this gonna work? And the actors just pulled it out and made it perfect.
She was playing with me. She wanted a friend. She wanted to kill you. I was gonna lead her away. You could have died. It's the same thing. You killed her. You killed her.
There's a reason there wasn't really a zombie TV show before. Effects need to be really good on a television show so that people don't fall out of the reality that you're trying to sell.
The best zombies, I think, are what Greg is doing in The Walking Dead, the best zombies today. And there's a lot of CGI there, you know, it's necessary because these zombies have been around for so long, now they're decaying and rotting, you know?
Just a little more.
Oh, there's that one famous The Well Walker.
Come on!
Where he's just so waterlogged and bloated that he just sort of like comes apart.
That's one of the beautiful things that Greg does is his team, you can see the lost person behind the monster. You know, that's when they become scary. I never get sick of it, honestly. They keep reinventing the wheel with the zombies. It's nuts.
Obviously, the irony is, who are the Walking Dead? Is it the actual zombies or is it the people?
Right.
And what are they willing to do to each other to survive? And that's
at what point do you lose your humanity?
Right.
The Walking Dead being on for so long surprises me because y'all all should be dead by now, man. You know, but it doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't it feel like zombies are cresting now, too? Yeah, right now it does seem like we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Yeah, the dumbing down of society. We're all zombies.
Zombies are representative of Alzheimer's, a terrifying disease, and zombies are representatives of cancer. To me, what's happened with the zombie is now they're representatives of anarchy and the collapse of government, the collapse of order.
Zombies are really sort of a wonderful catch-all metaphor because they can mean absolutely anything. Zombies in 1968 are the breakdown of American society. In 2017, with The Walking Dead, who knows what it represents.
One takeaway could be that everything's hopeless. Another takeaway could be that humans will always persevere even when it seems like there's no reason to, or that it's impossible to.
Yeah, zombies will never die, no pun intended. It's so interesting, the resurgence of zombies and the fact that they kind of won't ever go away. We'll always be telling stories. I think we're never going to lose our fascination with them.
Half a century ago, George Romero created the modern zombie, America's great contribution to monster horror. Now zombie movies are an international phenomenon. The zombie plague has infected the world, as relentless and unstoppable as the flesh-eating undead.